The Australian Bitcoin industry body fundamentally was a result of the fact that the Australian Bitcoin industry didn't have appropriate representation here in Australia.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is the Transformation of Value podcast. In this episode, I talk with Bayani Mills, Secretary and Acting CEO at the Australian Bitcoin Industry Body, providing advocacy on behalf of their Bitcoin industry members and advancing the adoption and understanding of Bitcoin in Australia. We take a deep dive into Bayani's work with the industry body, educating politicians, making submissions on bills before Parliament, and trying to carve out a clear space for Bitcoin in the minds of the public and politicians. Now, not everybody agrees with the idea of engaging the political leviathan, but as Bayani outlines, there can be real consequences to inaction, and though Bitcoin functions fine regardless, regressive policy can make life hard for everyday Australians to get started with Bitcoin. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out. My emails are always open, hello@thetransformationofvalue.com. Otherwise, on to the show. I wish you had said something, because I have this like $500 mic and I was like, hello, welcome to the show. So, but anyway, Bayani, how have you been?
Good. Busy, but good. I've been
Yeah.
trying to, do that work-life balance thing and, well, work-life, Bitcoin life kind of thing. But
Oh,
it's getting there.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
I,
getting busy.
I understand. Well, look, I guess by way of introduction, I thought maybe we could start with your Bitcoin story and I guess how you became more broadly involved with Bitcoin advocacy in Australia, please.
Oh, geez. I mean, that's a bit of a long story. Let's
Crack
see.
open a beer.
Yeah. Where to begin?
Well, how did you get into Bitcoin?
So probably about 2012, came across a Verge article. This one I know because I've told it a couple of times. But when I've spoken about it, I've also always noted that it's ended as quickly as it started. Just broke ass, no money. The on-ramps were quite difficult to get a hold of, certainly nowhere near as easy to acquire now, and even that's problematic. But yeah, only got a little bit a couple of years later, just prior to the 2017 run up. And yeah, I mean, I kind of looked at it from a technology point of view in that it was intriguing to me, given that I've had to send money overseas to family in the Philippines. And so I know the hurdles and the barriers and the friction that causes or that inherently has. But yeah, didn't really understand it from any other perspective other than convenience, and it was just a as a medium of exchange. But outside of that, was probably more of a crypto guy early on, and I think that's probably the story for most people. And then from there on in, became more of a Bitcoiner, got burned by Celsius. And yeah, I think probably about that time, I thought, no, over this, I'll just stick with Bitcoin. I have a better understanding of why I was doing the things that I was doing. Yeah, just
Yeah.
became more and more orange pilled in that sense.
Yeah, interesting. And so that story about sending money to the Philippines, obviously a lot of remittances for family and that sort of thing. Can you tell me more about that, please?
So yeah, generally it's been a matter of using Western Union. With Western Union, you would send them money via a BSBN account number, and then they'll wire it through, and then several days later they'll say, "Hey, listen, you can send your family member to any Western Union branch," and they would be able to pick that up using a special code. Fast forward a couple of years, and they had almost like these little self-service booths at service stations where you would just punch it in, and then you'd also do the same process, but it's a little bit more streamlined, a little bit quicker. But the fees were anywhere between 15 to $20 upwards for, at the time, just sending a couple of $100 to help out with whatever is needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And is that a flat fee though, or does it scale up as you send more money?
If I remember correctly, there was a flat fee plus you would lose, I guess, stuff on rates, the spread.
Yeah, the spread. Yeah. Yeah.
So the spread, yeah, the rates were never particularly favorable. But what can you do? You either got Western Union or MoneyGram, and the duopoly there is, yeah, problematic.
Yeah.
I suppose there's more of a Hawala kind of style thing that's available, but yeah, it comes with its own friction.
Yeah. And so you explored using Bitcoin. I mean, was that successful, being able to use Bitcoin to send money to family or?
Early on, no. As services over in the Philippines have become a little bit more accessible, it's been easier to do so. Family over there, I think, don't really get it so much in terms of what Bitcoin can do. But I think that comes down to a high time preference. You're constantly having to try and work out where your next meal's coming from, as opposed to being able to think about how you're going to be able to save for the future. I think that really, yeah, there's that division there that we in the Western world probably have this privilege of being able to save money a little bit more, whereas those in emerging markets just don't have that ability. Well, yeah, broadly speaking, they don't because you're constantly fighting for survival. You're just trying to survive rather than trying to work out, well, here I can settle, here I can develop a family, here I can be able to save long term and put things into assets that can appreciate in value.
Mm.
There's none of that. And why would
Yeah.
there be with the level of financial literacy that's needed to understand the monetary system as it stands?
Yeah. And I guess even if you were to be able to send Bitcoin through to family overseas, what are the facilities like for converting that into the local currency?
Certainly better than it used to be.
Okay.
Yeah. There are, it's interesting. It's easier than it used to be, and probably broadly speaking, a lot easier than most Western countries. In that there are a lot of outlets, and in the same sense, you might look at Bitcoin ATMs. You could send Bitcoin to someone overseas, or particularly in the Philippines, and they would be able to cash that out into pesos through a number of different outlets. So they could do it at a local service station, they could do it at a local supermarket, they could do it through ATMs, they could have it go through to a bank account, especially through services like one that's run by the bank, one of the banks in the Philippines over there, called coins.ph. Yeah, that seems to be a pretty highly integrated on and off ramp for Bitcoin, insofar as you can just have your Bitcoin in there and buy yourself phone credit, because they're still on a very much, I'll buy 7 days worth of credit, 10 days worth of credit, X amount of data, which, yeah,
Yeah.
obviously a little bit different over here in Australia with, month-to-month plans or annual plans. But yeah, over there, it's still, I'm going to be able to pay for X amount of text messages,
Yeah.
or X amount of text messages plus X amount of data. So everyone's always trying to find, where can you find the cheapest data plans for that week. So you might have people that have multiple phone numbers merely to be able to keep their costs down. So you won't talk to people via their phone number. You talk to people via Messenger and WhatsApp, etc. Because it's all data driven rather than SMS.
Interesting. But okay, that's really fascinating. So I guess you had this connection to exploring it as a technology, but now you're actually quite involved with Bitcoin in Australia at a high level, because I know you're one of the organisers of the Bitcoin Sydney meetups, and you're also working with the Australian Bitcoin industry body. So I guess at a high level, maybe you could share a bit about the work you're doing with those groups, please.
Sure. With Bitcoin Sydney, that was as a result of a merger, because there was a couple of guys down here, Andrew Finney and myself. Andrew had run a single Northern Beaches meetup here in Sydney, off his own back. And, it started well. It was him and one other person. And that's all you need for a meetup. The second one was very, very good. But having met up with Finney, and also having gone to Bitcoin Sydney a couple of times, we discussed talking with the hosts of Bitcoin Sydney, JP in particular, and looking at how we feed our local meetups into the major leagues. the major monthly meetups where we will have speakers, etc. And insofar as being the insular peninsula that we are, where people tend not to leave this area, the people that do go in can still report back a couple of weeks later. Hey, this is what this is who we had speaking, and this is what happened. So it makes the larger meetups a little bit more accessible in that information get passed down and passed out to other local meetups. Since then, we've been able to roll out a couple of other local meetups, one at Western Sydney, one in Southern Sydney. So one in Miranda, one at Parramatta, because, well, yeah, it takes a good half an hour to 45 minutes for the majority of Sydney to try and get into the CBD. And to do so on a Wednesday evening just can sometimes be a non-starter. So being able to bring that similar schedule to something that's local and more accessible meant that we would be able to reach out to more people overall. And so that's been going well. The local meetups tend to get about half a dozen or so people. And our major meetups tend to get a couple of dozen at a time. And so, to step it up into the Premier Leagues, you've got Bitcoin Alive in each year. So, yeah, it's trying to build out those local communities and making it more local, rather than saying, oh, everyone in Sydney come into the CBD on a Wednesday night.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, just
Yeah.
sorry, pulling on that point before we get on to the Australian Bitcoin industry body. So, are you also collaborating with Bitcoin Alive, or
Not collaborating.
How would you describe?
Yeah. Chris does attend Bitcoin Sydney. So insofar as we talk about what I'm looking to try and achieve with ABIB and what we are achieving with Bitcoin Sydney and how that develops, how we can develop the Australian Bitcoin community nationally on a national level, because we still got a pretty shallow demographic. It's only best part of 25 million people across a very sparse country, and to be able to draw them all in for a single event annually can be hard. It can be costly for some people, especially if they're traveling interstate. But beyond the people that are already orange pilled, how do we start supporting the development of a parallel economy with the framework that we're currently dealing with? In that, the likes of Austrac, ASIC, and what they're trying to develop, and how that is viable on a Bitcoin standard when you've got a global monetary asset that cannot be managed in the same way as a centralized series of banks, like the four pillars that we have in Australia.
Yeah. What's Austrac?
Austrac is in effect the government oversight of AML CTF implementation here in Australia.
Oh, so they're tracking you, Austrac.
Literally, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So,
okay. So just sorry. Then come back though to the Sydney area meetups. So I wasn't aware that there were a number of these local meetups. I used to live in Sydney years ago, and it's a huge place, and so I can appreciate if you're up the Northern Beaches area or whatnot. Or I'm not even sure. Maybe the broader New South Wales, you get people come in from Newcastle and stuff like that. And I guess the whole area is quite big. And so you get these local meetups, but you've been able to align more with the big meetups in the city.
Yes.
And so there's, I guess, two-way communication going on.
Yeah, so the guys that have been coming to our Bitcoin Sydney meetups, our major ones, we've sought out people that were interested in starting a local meetup, something close to home, on a alternating or semi-alternating week. So there's no overlap there. But we're also cognizant of the fact that you can't necessarily have one every week. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess on that note as well, I mean, what have you found works well for kind of bringing this to life in terms of what are some successful strategies for empowering kind of the smaller local meetups to happen and to help funnel that through to the bigger meetups as well?
I think it's a matter of strength in numbers. You got to find the right kind of people that actually are interested. So I do ask around, and I ask people where they're from at our major meetup. And if I know, certainly this is what it was when we were starting these Parramatta and South Sydney meetups, was to try and find people that were in that area and asking them, would they be interested in running a regular monthly meetup? I said, look, even if it's not a matter of you personally having to be there every month, at least then if you're willing to host a couple, there might be other people that are also local. And that's what we've seen happen. I think that if you create groups of at least two people that are willing to put their hand up and help drive a local meetup, in effect, that they hold us themselves to account in that they can work together and say, hey, listen, I'm not going to be at this meetup. So, for instance, I was not at a meetup the other month because I was at a wedding. And I was, my counterpart was able to host it. And we're ensure, basically between the two of us, we're ensuring that the local meetups were just always being looked after, and there's somebody to help. Herd the cats, as it were, just let people know, hey, listen, we're over here, come over. We got a couple of signs that we put up here and there, also just flagging that we're at this location, and we do try and move them. Well, at least for the Northern Beaches one anyway, we do try and move that one around from location to location. Bit of change of scenery, but also to perhaps increase the likelihood that other businesses that are seeing us there will be interested.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a, hey, we're here. You can see us here. We've booked here. We've brought a dozen people here, and more of us could be coming here if you're interested in taking Bitcoin as payment.
Yeah. And are these generally like bars or restaurants that you target sort of
Yeah.
after hours?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just breweries, local breweries, hotels. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. And I guess one final thing just on these local meetups, how have you found it in terms of, I think Bitcoiners tend to try and find each other, but when you're trying to bring people or sort of signpost the local meetups that are happening in the Sydney area, what has been successful there in terms of getting it out there, sharing it? As there websites or platforms where you put the meetups, etc.?
Consistency.
Okay.
Just consistency. We are a sparse lot. We are not in a bull market, so people aren't looking for us necessarily. So the trick would say is to be there and be ready to let other people know that you're there. So insofar as for the Bitcoin Sydney meetups, I post our meetups on Facebook as part of a Facebook events thing. That gets very little engagement, but that's not to say people aren't seeing it and also coming anyway. So we do know that people are seeing that type of the avenue, but they're not necessarily being engaged because they might not be confident about Bitcoin in particular. But we've had people, we had one person turn up who had bought Bitcoin at an ATM, didn't know anybody that had crypto or Bitcoin, but did some of her own self-research and found our meetup at meetup.com and came to the meetup, came to a local meetup. And yeah, we were just able to have her go to other people that were attending and ask her questions and find out a bit more about Bitcoin. And I think that's what you basically want these social meetups to be, an opportunity of an unstructured meeting of people that can come in, learn about Bitcoin from different perspectives, rather than necessarily having a leaker where they might feel that they're disconnected because they don't know anyone there. So yeah, we sort of leverage that social aspect more at the local ones because it is a local thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess now moving on to your work with the Australian Bitcoin industry bodies. So, coming back to this at a high level, what is the focus of the organisation and how have you been able to make progress with that?
So, the Australian Bitcoin industry body is there to be the voice of the Australian Bitcoin industry body. And it's very robotic to say, but it is. Whilst its goal overall is to advance Bitcoin across Australia, it does have to contend with the fact that it has limitations in its scope, in that we're not trying to advocate against other things like against crypto per se, like strictly speaking. And I think that's where there is some disconnect for some people that are pro Bitcoin, but they're still crypto bros, etc. And the Australian Bitcoin industry body fundamentally was a result of the fact that the Australian Bitcoin industry didn't have appropriate representation here in Australia. We've got a crypto industry that's quite well funded, a lot of VC backing, and I think that because of that, there's not any particular funding that goes towards supporting Bitcoin only projects, or specifically a Bitcoin only narrative. And it's, everyone's pumping their own bags. Everyone wants to ensure that the regulations doesn't look after or hit them, even though that, their financial product is a financial product. We know that Bitcoin is not considered to be a financial product. The concerns that we see coming down the track is that out of convenience, government organizations are going to treat Bitcoin the same as crypto just because it's problematic to them to have to untangle that. So ABIB's goal, certainly from a regulatory point of view, is to ensure that we are getting the word out to the bureaucrats, the policymakers, media, and the public that Bitcoin isn't crypto, crypto isn't Bitcoin, and they should most definitely be treated differently. They are different assets. So we've been reaching out to policymakers, asking them, what their opinions are on Bitcoin from a personal stance. We will be running an annual survey, where I can develop a bit of a heat map to understand where along the entire political spectrum, given money is for everybody, where these politicians and bureaucrats sit along the support of Bitcoin. Are they supportive of Bitcoin? Are they not supportive of Bitcoin, or do they have no opinion on it at all at the moment? And I've been cognizant of not saying anti-Bitcoin because I think that pigeonholes them into a place where we can't help change their opinion on things. And that's certainly what we want to be able to do, is understand what their objections are and have that conversation with those individuals and be able to develop the content needed for them to understand why they would want Bitcoin. Because ultimately, whilst we don't need them, well, Bitcoin doesn't need them to understand, it certainly makes the process a lot quicker. That velocity of adoption happens a lot quicker when the individuals who are also people that want hard money but just don't know it, once they realize why they want hard money, then they are more inclined and incentivized to make regulations that support Bitcoin rather than be not supportive of it.
Yeah. Have you been able to get much engagement from Canberra about the work you're doing with ABIB?
It's been a couple of years since we ran a survey. It's been about 2 years, I believe. At the time, there was a number of supportive politicians.
Oh, really?
And I think that what we've seen is Bitcoin's not relevant in current discussions with people. People are concerned about cost of living. We understand, like as Bitcoiners,
It's all connected.
Yeah, we understand that, but most people don't. And so really it's about, I'm sort of looking at it a way of how do you have them how do we chip away at their reluctance to look at it in a way that complements the fact that most people don't come to Bitcoin in one hit. They have multiple touch points that helps them understand over time. If you just yell at anyone saying you have to take Bitcoin, then why would they want to? You're just going to be another person yelling in their face, telling them what to think. And so that process, I think it's just going to be it will be a process that does take time. But it will be a matter of providing them with multiple touch points that handles their objections, because we're having that conversation with them that allows them to think about why they don't support Bitcoin, and it is a perhaps a text-based conversation where we can provide content that addresses those concerns, provides use cases and also case studies, both domestically and internationally, how Bitcoin is being used in a way that they're not yet aware of. And that's largely what we're trying to deal with is closing that chasm, that knowledge gap between what we know is happening within the Bitcoin industry globally and what these bureaucrats and policymakers don't know.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
they're not incentivized to know. Well, yet.
yeah, that's fascinating. This kind of the way Bitcoin kind of hits politics and the way they
Yeah.
sort of engage with each other, because in a way, as you alluded to, I mean, a lot of the sort of crypto stuff, it tends to be well moneyed. It tends to have corporations and companies behind it. And
Yep.
even though there are Bitcoin companies operating in Australia, there's sort of the overwhelming tendency is this decentralization, which means it doesn't really have a head to cut off, as Satoshi
Correct.
said. So it's sort of, I mean, certainly challenging, I guess, to herd the cats and bring that together in a way that is accessible for the legacy institution, which kind of needs somebody or some organization to talk to. But I also hear you when you say that it kind of it's not necessary to the success of Bitcoin, but it can make the path a lot smoother for a country or a nation state for it to not get outright militant against Bitcoin by kind of educating them, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's a chasm that needs to be crossed as the adoption curve changes. And that only happens by changing hearts and minds, not through necessarily ostracizing groups. And I think that what we'll probably find is as there is this centralization away from crypto into Bitcoin because people are really reallocating their resources from poor resource capital allocation into better capital allocations, we'll find that there'll be more support. But it is an uphill battle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think it is a matter of a long-term moves and counter in that we know that there will be entities that are incentivized to push back against what we're suggesting. There will be, let's call it the bank, it is the banking sector, for instance, who are going to be less incentivized by what we're suggesting. But that's not to say that the banking sector couldn't, in and of itself, be part of the solution, because it's very unlikely that we're not going to have the Australian dollar. All these sovereign nation states are likely to continue with their dollar until such time as they can't. And having the policymakers and bureaucrats understand how that transition occurs in a way that doesn't burn the whole thing down for them. Yeah, it's about having those individuals understand how Bitcoin helps them achieve their goals as individuals, as policymakers, as part of their portfolio, as a corporation. That there are so many different angles there for Bitcoin to help, but people just don't know.
Yeah.
They just don't.
Yeah. And can you give an indication of the kinds of members that you have for your organization? Who are you representing with the industry body?
So we have 5 of the Australia's Bitcoin-only exchanges. They are what I call our industry members, in that they are businesses that only exist because of Bitcoin. The rest, in terms of our financial sponsorship, are just everyday people and businesses just contributing towards that on an annual basis. Fundamentally, we are there, but we don't do a lot of. There's no advertising in terms of what we do. That is something I'm looking to try and change. I do want us to be able to be out there and let other people know, hey, listen, if you want this to change here in Australia, here's how you can contribute. And I don't mean just financially. I mean, there are a plethora of ways that we want to be able to pull in the people that are interested in changing the narrative for Bitcoin in Australia and crafting that narrative for Bitcoin in Australia and putting that to use. We've had over a decade of media telling us, well, telling the public, including us, what to think of Bitcoin, having that narrative told to us, having that narrative crafted by other parties. It is about time that Australia has the ability to craft that narrative. And part of that is being politically engaged, being engaged with media. Because if you have a media and a political sphere that is not not well educated on Bitcoin, then what can you expect from them to do? They're going to
Yeah.
act with the information that they believe. And if no one's there to address that, if no one's there to educate them, then we shouldn't expect anything to change.
Yeah.
And someone's got to do it.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I think there's this kind of nuance to the nature of how Bitcoin emerges that seems to see the demise of politics with a capital P, yet I think we will always have politics with a lowercase p, which is basically people communicating with each other. And so even though the sort of the way states organize or the kind of the bigger question of the state, I certainly think Bitcoin will change that, and it is changing that. The nature of human societies is that there are people, and when we communicate, and this sort of project you're undertaking is it's really interesting because it is sort of that meeting of the old world and the new world, but it's meeting people where they're at, right?
And that's one of the things I try and do is be, I guess, empathetic towards where people are in their journey.
Yeah.
Having been through a journey probably not dissimilar to most, in that you start understanding Bitcoin as a way to increase your wealth. Then you think of crypto, etc., and think, well, this is how I can go with the hype. But then you have a deeper understanding about money and what the problems are, and you you adjust yourself accordingly. I think that it for most people that's going to be the case, and understanding an individual's concerns is so critical to orange pilling them, because I think for the most part we look at it and go, oh, the problem's the money. Yeah, but they don't get that yet. Like,
Yeah.
you push them down there, but they're still holding onto the edge of the rabbit hole, going, "Hang on,
Yeah.
I'm not ready for this."
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of it as well is, certainly Bitcoin, it's the honey badger. It just keeps going and it doesn't care. But at the same time, how long can somebody hold out? Because, certainly we can talk about this in a moment, but the regulation and limitations that are being put on people, and unless you're in a position where you're actually willing to leave Australia and move somewhere else, you kind of have your lot set with what the Australian government decides to do. And I think there is a sort of reality check there that things could get a lot worse before they get better. And we saw that with COVID. And the only way to engage with that system as it currently stands as the status quo is to, engage with them. I certainly, hodl Bitcoin and do the Bitcoin stuff as well. But I mean, they have the monopoly on violence right now. That's why they're the state. And so you kind of have to work with that, I guess, to some degree at least. So it's sort of almost the two prongs of, Bitcoin, self-sovereignty. But there is an incumbent power structure that can come and take your stuff,
Yeah. We've had conversation with the Libertarian Party about Bitcoin, which obviously stems from the fact that we have got these overlapping values, and they're not dissimilar to, I think, what most people in general want. They want to be able to live their lives. They don't want to have violence, metaphorically or physically, visited upon them. They're not looking to visit violence metaphorically or physically upon others. They just want to live their lives. They want to enjoy time with the family. They want to be able to bring up the kids. They want to be able to live in a property that they like, in an area that they like, with a community that they like. That is true, I think, for most people.
Yeah.
And I think it is very easy to other politicians and this othering of politicians and othering of media as if they're not individuals themselves that have these wants and needs that they want to fulfill. And Yeah,
Well,
it can
they're
be.
people at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, they're people, and for us to be able to successfully orange pill them is to have them understand that why they're in the position that they're in, why they're struggling to make their mortgage payments, why they were incentivized to be over leveraged and take out more of a loan than they could otherwise have afforded under a better, under a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, no, no. I mean, that's all. I mean, I find that very interesting, and certainly this is something I am exploring myself in terms of, what is the state? Because this is kind of a bigger concept, but certainly to understand the state, you need to see it first. And I
yeah,
think to target politicians, they're sort of the operatives of it, but
yeah,
the power structure itself is the thing that is causing these issues. And so Bitcoin is already chipping away at that, or as a separation of money and state. But
yeah,
in the short to medium term, the state still has power, and so there's things that can be done to enable Bitcoin to flourish. Because it will always be there, but it could be repressed and adversarial, or it could be embraced and encouraged, and everyone benefits. So there's kind of like the two paths, right? Which is,
yeah.
I think, a very interesting way of looking at it.
The path that we're taking with ABIB is a top-down approach
Mm.
in that, yeah, ABIB's here to address the immediate threats to Bitcoin in a regulatory framework sense. And when I say threats, I mean Bitcoin in and of itself doesn't care what Australian politicians does, right? But Australians will care about what the politicians do to inhibit and prevent their access to an asset that we know is going to exponentially grow in value. So whilst it's there doing its thing, the grassroots level, these meetups that we do, is how we incentivize those same people that we're addressing to make decisions that are in their best interest because they're in our best interest.
Mm.
Saying earlier that we need to be politically engaged, I think for the people that are inclined to be that, then they, seriously have a look at whether it is viable for them to be an independent candidate, to be a representative of an existing party, as Bitcoiners. You're already aligned with, you may already be aligned with a political party. If you're not, you can run as an independent.
Mm.
At least then you're being able to stand up for what you believe in a way that ensures that there is representation outside of the existing parties.
Mm.
We've, as much as there is this heaping on the independence that we see of these teal independents, regardless of their sourcing of money, that's been a point of contention. They are breaking apart what used to be a fundamental duopoly for the political parties.
Was that teal independence? Did you say?
Yeah.
So neither
So
neither Labor nor the Conservative.
correct.
Yeah.
So they've been given this name of teal independence, and I
Okay.
suppose they've adopted it. A number of them have similar funding. So to what degree that they're independents, not quite sure. Contentious. But if there are more people being independents, not having to toe a party line, it means that the individuals in government have to be more persuasive about their the way they go about doing things instead of pushing things through one way or another. It
Mm.
means that there is an ability for us to have an open, well, if this misinformation, disinformation bill doesn't go through, yeah, we'll still have the ability to discuss, the merits of whether or not legislation for one side or another or not at all goes through.
Yeah. So just pulling on that thread, though, you just mentioned this combating misinformation and disinformation bill, which I know that ABIB made a submission on.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So the Australian Bitcoin industry body, we responded or provided a submission to the Senate, outlining its concerns about the fact that the banking sector gets protected from criticism. Now, one might say that, well, it's only if you're talking about things that are causing immediate serious harm to the credibility of the economy of Australia, of the banking system, etc. Now, in our submission, we pointed out the Australian government already has plenty of information about the inability for the banking sector to self-regulate. They need this type of regulation because they are incentivized to act poorly in the fact that some banks through to the board level were complicit in being fraudulent in what they were doing. So, as Australians, we should definitely be able to criticize openly about, oh, sorry, and be honest, and have those opinions heard by people. The way to address misinformation and disinformation from any perspective is not to silence the other party, but it's to present better arguments, better information, be able to present critical thinking into your arguments rather than ad hominems, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So just to pull on that, so are you saying that the banking sector was specifically outlined as in this bill that you can't criticize it in the way you've just described?
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. Like that they.
It's insane. It really is insane.
Because I know in some parts of the world, maybe the United States, I think encouraging bank runs is sort of some sort of felony, and you've got this history of that sort of thing. But actually bringing the banking system into disrepute, or at least asking questions, seems like, that's absolutely important to the functioning democracy, right? To sort of hold them to account.
Some of the biggest problems about the bill is the ambiguity of what determines something to be of serious harm.
Okay.
And that is fundamentally the problem about the bill. It does empower non-elected bureaucrats to make decisions that have no framework about how they make those decisions. And yeah, it's not the first time we've got legislation being presented like this. And I don't expect it to be the last, but if we're not addressing it, we're going to lose the ability to address it.
Yeah.
So, and this is the importance of being engaged. There is this level of disillusionment with the political spectrum and the political parties and how these people operate and these individuals and these departments operate. Now they're incentivized, but to throw your hands up in the air and go, well, I don't care. It's not my problem. It's like, well, like you said, some people, most people don't have the ability to leave the country. It's one thing to go, you know what, I'll get a passport, but you still need to get the approval of that country that you're going to, that they'll accept you. That's not just say, oh yeah, I'm just moving over here. We don't have that level of freedom of movement that people might think that they do.
Yeah. Well, just expanding on that then a little bit, how would you broadly paint the picture of the regulatory environment in Australia, or just in general, not even just Bitcoin, but I guess even sort of since COVID, is there sort of a chilling effect generally in terms of the political space, the regulatory space, and Bitcoin specifically? Is it hard to do business? Is it hard to use Bitcoin in that sense?
Okay. So you've got a situation where you've got Bitcoin as a personal use asset, where if I were to purchase Bitcoin today for $5,000 and go buy a car, not a problem. I don't pay CGT on it. Happy days. That's not obviously the case. I say obviously, but because some people still think it is the case that I could buy Bitcoin 10 years ago, use it to buy a car today, and because it's under $10,000, then I don't pay CGT. That's not the case. It's pretty clear on the ATO's website about when those types of situations apply, when it is CGT exempt. What I'd like to see happen to make Bitcoin a little bit more accessible as a parallel economy is caveats carved out specifically for Bitcoin, where businesses in and of themselves can take advantage of something similar, where de minimis transactions don't incur CGT events. And, whilst I'm not sure what those specific thresholds might be for a business that is holding Bitcoin before, if at all, it incurs a CGT status, those types of things I think are important avenues that we should be looking at to be able to not hinder the Australian people from being able to use Bitcoin in a parallel economy. In of itself, I think it's likely to result in a higher intake of taxes through GST if people are able to start using Bitcoin more openly, if businesses are able to take Bitcoin more openly. The long tail result is that they'll have more wealth to be able to invest in themselves, to be able to spend. So again, does results in it ultimately results in more GST. So I think that, yeah, let the Bitcoiners have at it, and let's see how this experiment goes here in Australia
Yeah.
for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And then the Australian government can sort of go, you know what, we're making a good buck out of this. These Bitcoiners are onto something. We're bringing in greater investment. These businesses have been able to use their Bitcoin and reallocate that capital into, perhaps new machinery, more advanced machinery, be able to be more productive in different ways, which ultimately leads to a more prosperous country.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the case. Decriminalizing things generally like that means, yeah, there's a tax take and they move out of the shadows.
Yep.
I'm sure there's nothing wrong with any of that. So I guess, though, more broadly, so that's the sort of usage of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. But in terms of the business side, what are the challenges and barriers for people wanting to set up Bitcoin businesses? I'm thinking exchanges,
The accounting.
miners, the accounting.
Definitely accounting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of ways they could look at it. Uh, Not financial advice, but certainly, yeah, you can speak to an accountant about how they could treat it. And that's the problematic part of it for businesses, being able to use Bitcoin, accept Bitcoin, etc. For the most part, what I've seen and spoken to people about in how they're using it is that they're accepting Bitcoin, adding it to a treasury. Right, and they'll hold that. So certainly for cash flow positive businesses, you're looking at less than 1% of takings being in Bitcoin anyway. So that's fine.
Yeah.
In terms of if you're a business, you take it in there, put your part of Bitcoin treasury, and then perhaps as the legislation changes, as the regulatory framework changes, you've got better access to it, different access to it, and that opens up some options for you. But fundamentally, at the moment, it's just a Bitcoin treasury that you can increase the wealth and value of your business.
Yeah, I'm thinking though, Bayani, in terms of someone wanting to run something like a Lightning infrastructure, they want to offer custodial solutions,
Yep.
getting bank account access for the fiat side. What's just broadly, what's that stuff like in the financial regulation side in Australia?
Not consistent.
Okay.
Yeah. The incentive model that we have emerging here in Australia is that banks don't have an incentive to ensure that um, they don't hit anybody with a false positive in terms of risk mitigation on AML, CTF.
Austrac.
Yeah, the Austrac stuff. So um, the the regulations that come down from FATF, they come through AUSTRAC, and AUSTRAC push them out through to the banking sector, or in fact to a lot of different sectors, including DCEs or digital currency exchanges, of which our members, the exchanges, are. So being AUSTRAC registered means that you have to comply with the requirements of AML CTF. And so we are engaged with that. Like ABIB's engaged with AUSTRAC on those types of discussions, on where they see the risk. What we see, however, is that there is a different profile of risk for Bitcoin-only exchanges versus crypto exchanges. Yeah, there's a different profile of risk. And because of that, we look at it and go, hey, hang on, you're trying to hold us to the same standards as these guys, or not even the same standards. You're burdening us with the same requirements as these guys, where we don't have the same level of risk in the slightest as these other exchanges or as all these other financial services, let's call them like remittance services, etc. We're basically facilitating the buying and selling of Bitcoin. There's no leverage trading, there's no selling of securities or government tokens or any of that. And as it stands, one of our exchanges, PayBTC, is non-custodial. Like it's you custody Bitcoin, and for the other ones, they all encourage you to take custody of your Bitcoin. They don't want the risk of holding on to your to Bitcoin in the exchange. It's like, hey, take it, take it. We'll help you understand single sig security, multi-sig security, collaborative custody, those types of models, and help you take control of your Bitcoin independently of us as an exchange, which is very different to how crypto exchanges operate.
Yeah.
So in terms of if you're looking to start a business here in Australia as a Bitcoin business, the regulatory framework is not ideal, as much as certain senators might argue that they're trying to fight for fintech to be brought to Australia. The regulations in of themselves are there to try and support blockchain and crypto rather than facilitating infrastructure for Bitcoin, like a Lightning service provider. That being said, Wallet Satoshi is a member and is it's a massive brand. It's a well-known global brand, but it's situated here in Australia, which is great. We have the ability to be at the forefront of this if we allow it to happen. But if there's no one fighting for it, if there's no one letting these policymakers know that we could be at the forefront of this, why would they make any changes?
Yeah,
Why would they facilitate it?
yeah, I mean, Wallet of Satoshi is an incredibly well-known brand, and I mean that's good for Australia. I mean, it's good for everyone to be able to say that's one of ours. And
Yes,
if that
exactly.
was to be pushed away because of a regulatory misunderstanding or a lack of education, I guess, I mean that would be a shame, right? With your organization, have you got anyone you're working with on this, or is it just you? Like, what's your? It sounds like you've got quite a bit of work laid out for you. I mean, have you got a team, or is it sort of?
Yeah, we have our sponsors. So our
Okay.
sponsors are also our collaborators. Some are happy with just providing a bit of financial support towards that. We don't have any paid positions as yet. It's all voluntary.
Yeah.
But the business of ensuring that there is a Bitcoin business still costs money. And we are actually on a Bitcoin standard. We don't have a bank account. So I was thinking about this a little while ago, but do we structure out our financials to ensure that we're only spending up to X amount of a percentage of our holdings each year to ensure that we're not having to be reliant on it. But obviously, the sooner we receive support, the better,
Mm.
because it means that it can be paying for itself because we can only go, maybe spend up to 10% of what we have each year, and we're good to go. But
Mm.
having that initial capital, that starting point is what's important. But to go back to your question about who's helping, look, we've got a couple of people that are contributing through developing content, whether or not it is directly related to a field that they're interested in. Let's say like macroeconomics or Bitcoin mining, or energy, like in terms of grids, renewables, that kind of thing. Looking at developing that type of content for the website is pretty critical to us at the moment. We've gone through a bit of a refresh on the website to really target two of the three audiences that I see as critical. That's policymakers, the media, and the public. Now, in terms of public, ABIB can help with that, but I think ABIB's there to help the meetups with that. Helping them get the word out to other people, helping meetups develop the information needed on, say, like btcmaps.org, which has a list of all the Bitcoin accepting businesses worldwide, but that information is all community driven. And so how do you find that community? It's not going to be somebody in Perth that is updating stuff for all the businesses that have just started accepting Bitcoin in Sydney. It needs to be the Sydney siders. And so we're trying to encourage the meetup organizers and these community voices to engage with their meetup groups. And like I said earlier, the working in pairs kind of thing. If there's two people that are willing to just put their hand up and say, "Hey, listen, we'll contribute to BTC maps as needed. You just let us know if a business is accepting Bitcoin, and we'll update it." Great. I mean, that's where it all starts, that decentralized process. But letting people know that that's an opportunity for them to contribute to advancing Bitcoin in Australia is effectively step one. If you don't know what you can contribute, then how
Yeah.
could you?
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess I mean you mentioned you're mainly got exchanges as your members, but Bitcoin touches many things as you know, and you mentioned the mining just before, and I just wonder. It seems like there's a huge opportunity for energy. I mean, you got a whole lot of different a whole different energy mix in Australia, but have you had much cut through, or have you made any progress in terms of say the energy and the Bitcoin mining side of the conversation?
Not particularly. And I think that's largely because most, like in terms of absolute number, most mining operations or hosted mining operations are coin agnostic. And that is to say that they don't go, "Hey, listen, we only Bitcoin mine Bitcoin, and the people that we host are only permitted to mine Bitcoin." Um, that isn't to say that there's not operators out there that do that, but the conversations I've had with different operators is that in terms of pubcos, like public companies that would be incentivized by accepting Bitcoin, sorry, by having Bitcoin as part of their grid. The problem is fundamentally the public perception. And to go back to what we're looking to try and do, how do you change public perception? It's not just having people attend meetups. It's not just addressing policymakers, but addressing media
Mm.
and driving that narrative. So we can, take use cases or sorry, case studies of what's happening around the world, bring them into something that's quite relevant here in Australia and have a look at different facilities. Like for instance, there's a facility up in Northern Territory that was sitting dormant for 3 years, unconnected to the grid. That asset could be generating a revenue for that asset owner if they were able to drop a couple of Bitcoin mining containers up there. Have they? I don't know.
Mm.
But fundamentally, there's a lost opportunity. So there is this, if people don't know, why would they?
Yeah.
And so part of that is, or rather to address the media perspective, we can take things that we hear about and have them, or rather have ourselves develop media releases that we can push out to media and drive that narrative about how Bitcoin is resulting in a greater uptake of renewables, how it's helping with grid operations and harmonizing the grid and ensuring that curtailment is not just being wasted.
Yeah, understood. And do you have much connection with, say, the Bitcoin Policy Institute in the United States or Bitcoin Policy UK, who are doing, I guess, similar work? Have you had much cross communication with them?
Yes, specifically with BP UK. I'm going to be getting in contact with BPI more. I haven't heard back from Satoshi Action Fund as yet. I think that there's some things that is a good overlap for here in Australia, but you've got the United States, which is a little bit different to our federated states here in Australia. It's a little bit, yeah, it's just a little bit different in its structure. But the BP UK has recently or will be launching a platform that allows other countries to also roll out their own version, so their own country-specific policy institutes or policy outlets. There's one in Australia run by Ashley Porter. And so him and I have been in contact quite a bit of recent, and he's working on he's already got a bit of a catalogue of research to look at. And so we're working closely to look at what types of talking points we're seeing are being relevant to to provide to himself, or rather to the group. I know that he's looking to recruit some other people into that. But yeah, I think it's quite important that we are looking internally domestically for content in terms of how Bitcoin is going to help Australia. As I said earlier, we have a very shallow market here in Australia. And whilst we've got some great minds, we could always do with more that can get in front of policymakers, etc. I would really love to see an industry day over at Bitcoin Alive as a separate day where there's an opportunity for private and public enterprise to be able to look at how Bitcoin can help them help their services. If it's a grid operator, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's incredible, and certainly, I mean, I imagine the BPI guys are a little bit busy just with everything happening in the United States at the moment. But
That's it. Yeah.
certainly leading the way with, I think at a state level, the legislation that Dennis Porter and that are trying to push through. To have like the right to mine and these kinds of things, which I'm not quite sure in the Australian context. It seems like it would be more of a federal engagement as opposed to at a state level, right?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it's a bit different, and it's kind of like to what degree senators can horse trade that kind of stuff, and whether or not it is worth them or worth it to them to horse trade. If there's legislation that they're trying to push through, but they can say, "Hey, listen, we'll allow this legislation to go through if you allow this part to go through or this caveat." So yeah, there's a lot of discussions, but I think for us to get to a point where that is viable, we would need to see a more of a almost like a critical mass of support for Bitcoin at a Senate level, both federally and at a state level as well. And I think that's another aspect that people could look at if they're able to engage local members at their local parliament, or rather their state parliament. It's probably important. Like we'd love to be able to see these friends groups. So you can have like a Friends of Bitcoin group in the state parliament or even the federal parliament, which is supposed to be it has to be rather a non-partisan group. So people from different political parties basically putting their hand up and say, yeah, I'll be a friend of Bitcoin. And then you can have these conversations about how you can see some advancement of Bitcoin, positive or supporting legislation, or be able to carve out these caveats that don't get in the way of Bitcoin. I think that part of that pathway is understanding the individual's time preference, whether they're high time preference, if they're low time preference, and whether they're willing to put in the effort to make it happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I guess looking forward, what is the overall outlook for, I guess, Bitcoin in Australia? You're talking about this critical mass of sort of on the political side, but also on the public side. What are you looking forward to? What's on your horizon for the future?
Lots are happening. From AB's perspective, I think it's doing a lot of what we're already currently doing in terms of what's already on our roadmap. That includes addressing existing proposals from government and responding to stuff that we're sure will come up. I think it's a bit of a multifaceted perspective in that, as I mentioned earlier, like you've got meetups coming at the grassroots. You've got ourselves trying to work at a top-down level and media. But I think it's going to be nation states that affect them on another level and have them. Yeah, I think that's going to be another forcing element for them that will have to have them reconsider where they are. And I think it's quite important that we use this downtime, this lull, to be able to build out and be ready for when people need Bitcoin. Yeah. We've in Bitcoin Sydney have developed a little bit of a small little Bitcoin library for books. So we've encouraged people to, if you've got people that are interested and are more readers, by all means, borrow one of the books, lend it to them. At some point, they can return it. But yeah, just building out things like that where things become far more accessible than than previously. It didn't used to be the case that we had as many Bitcoin meetups as we do. The ABIB website has a list of meetups across Australia in multiple states. Like it would be, yeah, it would probably be about 2 dozen or so
Yeah.
that are around the place. I mean, I think the only place that doesn't really get any representation that I'm aware of is Northern Territory. Like I said earlier, if there's people up in Northern Territory that are interested in running a meetup, just run one. Even if it's just you and another mate, just go down to the pub and talk Bitcoin,
Yeah.
uh, and let us
Yeah.
know. And that way we can let other people know. Because if we need to be able to amplify what these small meetups are doing, and that in of itself is what leads to a higher velocity of adoption. People understanding why they want Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think the other sort of macro consideration is I've heard a lot about the Sydney housing market, and it sounds like it's a damn sight worse than New Zealand, and the ongoing debasement and inflation, cost of living, these sort of issues, and it seems as if that could become a bit of a political. Well, it already is becoming a major political topic, but in terms of an inflection point, at which point people start really asking the question. I mean, is that something you're seeing coming? As in,
So what I'm seeing in discussions I've had is people reallocating and adjusting where they've got that capital, selling up investment properties to buy Bitcoin, taking out mortgages on principal places of residence to buy Bitcoin because if you take a 30-year mortgage and on $200,000 and service that without a problem, well, yeah, you're going to be better off with Bitcoin in your pocket than the mortgage. So yeah, we're seeing people reallocate their capital. I think that it's difficult when you've got spouses that don't see eye to eye on Bitcoin.
oh yeah,
And that's basically what it comes down to. Like,
yeah,
some women might say, oh, my husband doesn't really get Bitcoin yet, and trying to get him to do this, and same with husbands saying the same thing about their wives, etc.
yeah,
So there definitely is a desire to do that. I think people are certainly Bitcoiners are in that position where they're looking at the long tail result of this and going, you know what, we need to reposition, reallocate, and do something where we can still handle a mortgage, but we'll be able to acquire more Bitcoin. And I think that's probably the why more people are buying Bitcoin in self-managed super funds as well. That's also something we're seeing a lot of. Yeah, the conversations that I have, people are just looking at cost of living
mm,
largely,
mm,
and I think for the most part, you just have to sort of ask them, why do you think it is, and
mm.
walk them through why that might be the case, and then they might come to a point where they realize that they need Bitcoin.
Mm. And just pulling on that point though, you mentioned the self-managed super funds because there's also the Australian spot ETF, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, the only spot BTO ETF, yeah,
yeah,
for
yeah. Is that
monochrome.
is that popular? Like in terms of people looking at that as an option, or
Yeah,
as far as you
I
know?
think I see Jeff's Twitter posts daily. So they post what their closing is, and I don't think there's been many days, if at all. I think maybe one where they've not closed higher than the previous day.
I see.
Um, yeah, in terms of absolute number of Bitcoin held in held as part of that spot ETF.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a recent post from him was stating that people could deposit Bitcoin into that ETF and hold it as a security. And so that comes down to the way it was structured in terms of how you're able to move it from a individual purchasing it into an ETF back to yourself. And because it's all in your same name, there's no disposal.
Mm,
So there's no CGT aspect in that,
mm,
which is not the case when you've got other ETFs that claim to be spot ETFs, but they don't have the same type of structure that would allow that to happen because they're not really spot ETFs.
yeah, yeah. Interesting.
But yeah,
Well,
it is. I think it's an interesting and popular avenue for people that might not. be at a point where they have a spot a self-managed super fund, or they've got a bit of they've got different allocations elsewhere, and so for them it becomes a matter of convenience. And I think that that's probably the case for a lot of high net worths, etc. For them, it's not about self-sovereignty per se. It is more about being able to hedge their wealth in an asset that is not correlated like the to everything else.
Yeah. Well, look, Bayani, you've shared an incredible wealth of knowledge about all the things happening Bitcoin in Australia. I mean, it's fascinating, man, and I think it's awesome the work you're doing. It's sort of it can be quite inspiring to see you guys, yourself and others sort of stand up and actually do the work, put in the work to educate the media, the public, and the politicians, as you say, and I guess carve out an opportunity for Bitcoin to thrive in that environment, which it will always exist, and it can and it will do what it wants. But for it to be, I guess, accessible by the public, and for it to sort of smoothly transition into this Bitcoin world that we know is coming, it seems like greasing the rails with a little bit of that work that you're doing, it certainly would help, right?
Yeah, Bitcoin doesn't need the politicians. The individual will need Bitcoin more than it needs the individual. But certainly, if we're looking to bring a brighter future to everyone, then we can supercharge that. Bitcoin supercharges that, and I suppose to a degree we are evangelizing why that is the case.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the ideal outcome longer term is your organization sort of almost becomes irrelevant at the point where
100%. Yeah, it'd be great to do yourselves out of a job. If there's no need to fight for it, then great, we can disband. But at the moment, unfortunately, the case is that we have to keep fighting for our right to exist. For our right to be able to get Australians access to Bitcoin in a way that you mentioned earlier about the banking system and how easy it is, and I said it was inconsistent. It's because symptoms of that is that people are having their accounts frozen for inconsistent basis. So I might do a transfer and get my bank account closed up. Somebody else will get their bank account, make a transfer, and nothing will happen. It's very inconsistent. And even to the degree that you or I might call up the same bank and offer a similar story, the operator will make a subjective decision about whether or not your transaction or my transaction goes through. There's just inconsistency throughout, and there's no one you can complain to. There's no accountability against that.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, at a high level as well, I mean, just a little bit of empathy around how people come into Bitcoin, because I mean, you and I kind of, we know how to do it and how to get it if we had to start again and these sorts of things. But if someone's just learning for the first time, if there's not easy legitimate options for getting Bitcoin, man, it's going to be hard for them, and they might just give up. And I don't know if that's really, it's not something I want. And so make it easy, make it simple. And, once someone's in and they understand, there's always a way. But certainly for the vast majority of Australians, being able to just sign up to an exchange and get Bitcoin easily and then take self-custody is a really smooth thing. And you wouldn't want to see that get taken away from regulatory pressure.
We'd like to see greater collaboration with the banks to make that easier. But if they're fundamentally narrowing the exits, I don't think that there's
the choke point.
It's a choke point without choking. It's just making it a little bit harder. Just
making a gag.
Those thresholds are just making it a little bit more annoying.
All right, man. Well, look, if anyone wants to follow, firstly, is there anything else you wanted to mention? Anything else you got to share? That's it. Yeah. We've done a bit. If anyone wants to follow what you're doing with ABIB, Bayani, how can they find you?
You can go to AUSBTC IND body for Twitter, or bitcoinindustrybody.org.au, or follow myself at Bayani Mills, BAYANIMILLS on X.
That's awesome. And thank you so much for your time and sharing the awesome work that you're doing in Australia, man.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thank you for listening. I do hope you enjoyed the show. I am Cody Allingham, and that was the transformation of value. If you would like to get in touch, please send me an email at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com, and I will get back to you.